"You're an activist." Karoline Leavitt's voice rang out, sharp and unyielding, cutting through the stunned silence of the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia. On March 19, 2025, the courtroom was already a powder keg, but Leavitt's accusation turned it into a full-blown firestorm. She was standing among the spectators, her gaze locked on Judge James Boasberg, a federal judge appointed by President Barack Obama in 2011. The words were a direct attack, a public challenge to Boasberg's impartiality, and they sent shockwaves through the room. The case before Boasberg was a high-stakes battle over executive orders issued by President Donald Trump in early 2025, shortly after his second inauguration. Trump had ordered the mass deportation of thousands of foreign nationals, labeling them foreign terrorists for their alleged anti-U.S. activities. The orders broadened the criteria for deportation, targeting individuals with suspected ties to extremist groups, even without formal charges or convictions. The Department of Homeland Security had begun the deportations, sparking protests and legal challenges from immigration advocacy groups who claimed the orders violated due process and international law. The plaintiffs, represented by a team of civil rights lawyers, argued that the executive orders were a pretext for racial and religious profiling, disproportionately affecting Muslim and Middle Eastern communities. They sought an injunction to halt the deportations, claiming the Trump administration had provided no concrete evidence of terrorism and had denied the deportees their constitutional rights. The government, represented by Department of Justice lawyer Michael Grayson, defended the orders, asserting the president's authority under the Immigration and Nationality Act to protect national security. The hearing had been contentious from the start. Grayson had argued that the president's power to exclude aliens posing a national security risk was well established, citing the 2018 Supreme Court case Trump versus Hawaii, which upheld Trump's travel ban. He presented classified intelligence reports allegedly linking some deportees to online forums promoting anti-American sentiment. But the plaintiff's lead attorney, Sarah Mahmood, countered with a passionate plea. "Your Honor," she said, "the Trump administration has no evidence these individuals are terrorists. They're relying on vague reports and guilt by association. Many of these people have lived in the U.S. for years, built families, and contributed to their communities. Deporting them without due process is a violation of their rights and a betrayal of American values." Boasberg had listened intently, his skepticism of the government's case growing with each argument. Grayson's reliance on classified reports didn't sit well with him, and he pressed for more specific evidence. When Grayson insisted the reports were sufficient, Boasberg's frustration boiled over, leading to the remark that had prompted Leavitt's outburst. "This is nothing but a witch hunt," Boasberg had declared, his voice laced with disdain. "President Trump thinks he can deport anyone he wants by slapping a terrorist label on them, but this court won't stand for it. He's a reckless authoritarian who's weaponizing national security to target innocent people, and I'm not going to let him turn this country into a police state just to score political points." Boasberg's words were a scathing attack on Trump, far beyond the bounds of judicial neutrality. They were personal and inflammatory, a direct insult to the president and his administration. The courtroom buzzed with tension as spectators, reporters, activists, and government officials processed the judge's remarks. Among them was Karoline Leavitt, a 27-year-old senior advisor to the White House press office and a fierce Trump loyalist. Leavitt had been a key figure in Trump's 2024 campaign, known for her sharp rhetoric and unapologetic defense of his policies. She had come to the hearing to observe on behalf of the administration, but Boasberg's comments were more than she could bear. Leavitt stood up, her voice steady and commanding as she pointed at Boasberg. "You're a partisan activist and a Democratic judge," she continued, her words echoing through the room. "You were appointed by Barack Obama, and you're protecting his agenda, not the Constitution. This isn't justice, it's a sham, and you're abusing your position to undermine a duly elected president." The courtroom erupted in gasps and whispers. Leavitt's accusation was a bombshell, a public challenge to Boasberg's impartiality that laid bare the political fault lines of the case. Her words resonated with Trump's base, who had long viewed the judiciary as a liberal stronghold opposing his agenda. But they also crossed a dangerous line. Openly accusing a federal judge of bias in the middle of a hearing was a bold move, one that could bring serious repercussions. Boasberg's face flushed with anger, his composure shattered by Leavitt's outburst. "Young lady, you are out of line," he bellowed, slamming his gavel with a force that silenced the room. "I will not tolerate such disrespect in my courtroom. You're not a party to this case, you have no standing to speak, and you certainly have no right to insult this court. I'm fining you $5,000 for contempt, and if you say another word, I'll have you removed." The threat of a fine and removal was meant to reassert Boasberg's authority, but Leavitt wasn't backing down. She had anticipated pushback. She knew the risks of speaking out, but she also knew the power of her position as a Trump appointee. The administration had sent her to the hearing for a reason, to ensure their narrative was heard, even if it meant confronting the judiciary head-on. Leavitt took a deep breath, her mind racing with the stakes of the moment, and decided to press her case. "Your Honor," Leavitt said, her voice calm but resolute, "I'm not here as a lawyer or a party to the case. I'm here as a citizen and a representative of the American people who elected President Trump to protect this country. Your comments about the president were not only unprofessional, but also a clear violation of judicial ethics. Canon 2 of the Code of Conduct for United States Judges requires you to avoid impropriety and the appearance of impropriety. By calling the president a reckless authoritarian and accusing him of weaponizing national security, you've shown bias that undermines your ability to rule impartially in this case. I'm calling for your recusal, and I'm prepared to file a formal complaint with the Judicial Conference if you refuse." Leavitt's words were a masterstroke, a direct accusation of judicial misconduct backed by a specific reference to the ethical standards governing federal judges. Her demand for recusal, a formal request for Boasberg to step aside, was a rare and audacious move, one that few would dare make in the middle of a hearing. The courtroom fell silent, the weight of her statement sinking in. Even Boasberg, for all his anger, seemed momentarily taken aback by the precision and confidence of her argument. Sarah Mahmoud, the plaintiff's attorney, jumped in to diffuse the tension. "Your Honor," she said, her tone measured, "I object to Ms. Leavitt's remarks. She has no standing to speak in this proceeding, and her accusation of bias is baseless. Your comments were directed at the merits of the case, not a personal attack. I urge the court to proceed with the hearing and disregard this distraction." But Michael Grayson, the government lawyer, saw an opportunity to capitalize on Leavitt's intervention. "Your Honor," he said, "while Ms. Leavitt's delivery may have been unconventional, she raises a valid concern. Your remarks about President Trump were highly prejudicial, and they could be interpreted as evidence of bias. The government supports her call for recusal to ensure the integrity of this proceeding. If you refuse, we'll join her in filing a complaint with the Judicial Conference and seek an emergency appeal to the D.C. Circuit." Boasberg's anger gave way to a flicker of unease. He had expected Leavitt to back down after his threat of a fine, but her legal argument, and the government's support, put him in a precarious position. The Code of Conduct for United States Judges did indeed require impartiality, and his comments about Trump could be seen as crossing that line. A formal complaint to the Judicial Conference, the body that oversees judicial conduct, could lead to an investigation, and an appeal to the D.C. Circuit might result in his removal from the case. For a judge who prided himself on his reputation, the prospect of such scrutiny was a bitter pill to swallow. "I will not be intimidated by baseless threats," Boasberg snapped, though his voice lacked the conviction it had moments earlier. "This court has a duty to uphold the Constitution, not to bow to political pressure. Ms. Leavitt, your fine stands, and I'm denying your request for recusal. I've ruled impartially in countless cases, and I'll continue to do so here. Now let's return to the merits of the case before I hold everyone in contempt." But Leavitt wasn't finished. She knew she had rattled Boasberg, and she sensed an opportunity to press her advantage. "Your Honor," she said, her tone calm but resolute, "your refusal to recuse only strengthens my case. Your comments about President Trump weren't just a critique of his policies. They were a personal attack, and they align with a pattern of bias in your rulings. In 2017, you struck down Trump's executive order on sanctuary cities, citing concerns that were later overturned by the D.C. Circuit. In 2020, you ruled against his administration in a case involving the Dakota Access Pipeline, taking a position that favored liberal advocacy groups. And now you're poised to cancel these deportation orders, despite clear Supreme Court precedent in Trump v. Hawaii that upholds the president's authority in matters of national security. The record speaks for itself. You're a Democratic activist masquerading as a neutral judge. Leavitt's accusation was a calculated escalation, a public airing of Boasberg's judicial record that painted him as a partisan figure. She had done her homework, pulling specific examples from his past rulings to build a case for bias. Her reference to Trump versus Hawaii was particularly pointed, as it reminded everyone of the Supreme Court's deference to executive authority in immigration matters, a precedent that could undermine Boasberg's position in the current case. The courtroom buzzed with tension, spectators whispering among themselves as Leavitt's words sank in. Boasberg's face darkened, but he didn't interrupt. He knew that responding with another outburst would only fuel her narrative of bias. Instead, he took a moment to compose himself, then spoke in a measured tone. "Ms. Leavitt, your accusations are baseless and inflammatory," he said. "My rulings are based on the law, not politics. The Sanctuary Cities case was about federal overreach, not partisanship, and the D.C. Circuit's reversal doesn't change that. The Dakota Access Pipeline case involved environmental concerns, not political bias. And as for Trump versus Hawaii, that case dealt with a travel ban, not mass deportations without due process. I will not dignify your attack with further response. We're moving forward with the hearing." But Leavitt had already achieved her goal. She had exposed Boasberg's potential bias to the public, planting seeds of doubt that would linger regardless of his ruling. She sat down, her expression one of quiet determination, knowing that her words had shifted the narrative in the administration's favor. Grayson, emboldened by Leavitt's intervention, pressed the government's case with renewed vigor. "Your Honor," Grayson said, "the executive orders at issue are a lawful exercise of the President's authority under Section 212F of the Immigration and Nationality Act. The Supreme Court has upheld this authority, and the intelligence reports we've submitted, while classified, provide sufficient basis for the deportations. The plaintiff's due process claims are unfounded, as the deportees were given notice and an opportunity to appeal through immigration courts. We ask that the court deny the plaintiff's motion for an injunction," Sarah Mahmoud countered with a passionate rebuttal. "Your Honor, the government's reliance on classified reports is a smokescreen," she said. "They've provided no specific evidence that these individuals are terrorists. Deporting them without a fair hearing violates their Fifth Amendment rights. The executive orders are a clear overreach, targeting vulnerable communities for political gain. We urge the court to grant the injunction and stop these deportations." Boasberg listened to both arguments, but the tension in the room was palpable. Leavitt's accusation had cast a shadow over the proceedings, and Boasberg knew it. He couldn't afford to appear biased, especially with the threat of a judicial conference complaint looming. After a brief pause, he delivered his ruling. "I'm granting the plaintiff's motion for a temporary injunction," Boasberg said, his tone carefully neutral. "The government has failed to provide sufficient evidence that these deportations are necessary for national security, and the plaintiffs have raised valid due process concerns. The executive orders are on hold pending a full evidentiary hearing, which I'll schedule for next month." The ruling was a setback for the Trump administration, but Leavitt's intervention had turned the hearing into a broader victory for their narrative. As the courtroom emptied, Leavitt stepped outside to face a swarm of reporters. She knew this was her chance to amplify her message and cement Boasberg's bias in the public's mind. "Today, Judge Boasberg showed his true colors," Leavitt said, her voice steady and confident. "His attack on President Trump was unprofessional and a clear violation of judicial ethics. This isn't about justice, it's about a Democratic judge protecting Obama's legacy at the expense of our national security. We'll file a complaint with the Judicial Conference, and we'll appeal this ruling to the D.C. Circuit. The American people deserve a judiciary that upholds the law, not one that plays politics." Leavitt's statement went viral, dominating headlines and sparking a firestorm on social media. Trump supporters hailed her as a hero for calling out judicial bias, while critics accused her of undermining the rule of law. But in the courtroom, her performance had left everyone speechless. She had taken a $5,000 fine and turned it into a platform to expose Boasberg's bias, using his own words and record against him. Her legal knowledge, Strategic defiance and unapologetic loyalty to Trump had proven the judge's partisan leanings, at least in the court of public opinion. The plaintiffs celebrated their temporary victory, but they knew the fight was far from over. The government's appeal to the D.C. Circuit and Leavitt's complaint to the Judicial Conference meant the case would drag on, potentially reaching the Supreme Court. For the deportees and their families, the injunction offered a reprieve, but the uncertainty of what came next weighed heavily. As Leavitt left the courthouse, she felt a sense of triumph. She had taken on a federal judge, exposed his bias, and shifted the narrative in the administration's favor, all while facing down a fine and the threat of removal. Her bold stand had shocked the courtroom, proving that Boasberg's Democratic leanings were more than just speculation. Karoline Leavitt had made her mark, and the Trump administration had a new champion in their fight against a judiciary they viewed as their enemy.